Hello friends and welcome to a new video. Today I'm going to answer a very frequently asked question, which is how I paint light and shadow in my illustrations with watercolors, and I'm going to show you two different approaches because I use both of them depending on the illustration and on the subject, and you may choose the one that best suits your needs. So let's start. The very first thing I do before painting is deciding the source of light, so whether the light comes from the left or from the right or from above or below, and I do this by putting an arrow near my character so that it indicates where the light comes from, and I have this clear in mind before painting. And the very first approach I use is with inks. So in this case, I decided the shade for my shadows. I usually use purple or blue shadows in my paintings. So as you can see here, I'm mixing blue and magenta, and then I add a bit of yellow so that I can obtain this kind of purple, like a very muted purple for my shadows. So now I start painting on my character, and this approach consists in painting the shadows first and then going on top with watercolors as usual, and having the arrow on the left. This means that the light hits the left part of the body and all the right parts of the body are in shadow. But you have to keep in mind that the face has different planes, and this means, for example, that the nose is more prominent than the cheeks. Also, the forehead is more prominent than the eyes. Basically, the eyes are sunken in, so they catch very little light and they're mostly in shadow. And of course, we all know that we have to put some shadow underneath the nose because it casts a shadow in that point. But also, if the light comes from left, like in this case, the nose will cast the shadow on the right side of the face, and also the folders of the dress and the sleeve overlapping the rest of the dress. So there are a lot of points where there's cast shadow or there's overlapping shadow. While for the hair, I usually decide to let just a few spots lighter than the rest of the hair, so I'm not so concerned about shadows because I want to focus more on the body and the face, and the hair is like more stylized. I don't need to have a very believable shadows and lights, so I just put some highlights. In this case, I paint around highlights and let them as they are. Now I'm going on top with a second layer because I want to intensify some shadows and to shut down some highlights in the hair, especially in the farthest part of the hair, which is the one on the right. So I usually darken the areas that come from overlapping parts like the sleeve and the dress, or the face and the neck, and also the parts that will never catch light, like the back of the head, that portion of the hair that you can see that is very, very dark. And this is it. So by doing this, I've obtained some volumes and depth, and I can go on top with watercolors and paint in a very simple way because I don't have to be worried about shadows anymore. So I take this orangey color and put it on the hair. As you can see, even if I don't put other shades inside, it still has some variation and depth and volume. So this technique is so nice. But I strongly recommend you to use permanent inks. I may not specify it before, but these are waterproof inks, because if you put watercolors underneath, they may lift up when you go after with watercolors on top. Permanent inks will stay there forever and they will not move, and you can paint on top with 10 layers of watercolors or whatsoever. So I usually use this technique when I'm painting complex illustrations because they may have a lot of objects and subjects going on, and I want to have everything defined before going with watercolors. So I want to have the light source defined, the shadows defined, and I also love to use one shade for the shadows, like in this case the purple, because it unifies everything. Every color I put after looks blend in, and it's so smooth, and overall there's this nice and uniform result. Now, before going into the second approach, I invite you to subscribe to my channel since your support and feedback means a lot for my work and the time I put in, so thank you in advance. For the second approach, I use only watercolors, and since I don't want the light to be too white and cold, I use a yellow to create this layer of color on top of everything, and then I start painting as usual. So this time I don't have shadows underneath and I have to create them, and what I do is taking the color, for example in this case the brown for the hair, and paint around the light. So I create these interesting shapes that basically divide the light part from the dark part, and I just have fun creating interesting shapes. I don't think too much of being too believable and too realistic. I just want to create this separation of light and dark, this strong contrast. Also, I use a bit of diluted brown to create a sort of mid-tone between the lightest part and the brown part. And then I take a smaller brush to create these strands of hair and these lines that fade into the lightest part. And in the end, regarding the hair, I just put some indigo into the brown so that I create the back part of the hair that is farther from the viewer. So I want to create this kind of distance between the front part of the hair and the back part of the hair. Again, for the face, I do the same method, and since the light comes from behind and also a bit from the right side, everything is in shadow, but there are some spots of light. So I paint everything except those spots, like for example the right side of the nose and a spot on the lip, and also a little spot on the left cheek, because in reality, even if the whole left cheek would be in shadow, I want to add interesting shapes and variation and contrast, so I still put some light in there because this is my personal choice of design. And you could do the same. You don't have to be very realistic, because the most important thing in illustration is shape design, language design, and overall you can do whatever you want. This is just an example to show you how I create shadows and light in my illustrations. But you can choose to not paint shadows at all, or to don't have light in your illustrations. It's up to you. There aren't such wrong or right choices in art. And yeah, this is the second approach I usually use when I want my illustrations to feel spontaneous and painterly, and when I don't want to do too many layers and to use both inks and watercolors. So I usually go for this approach when I do quick studies of characters, and I think the contrast in here is very nice and brings the character alive. I love both characters, but I don't know, let me know in the comments which of these approaches you like the most and you feel it's more appealing. Thank you for watching this video, and see you next week in the next one. Bye!